Hi, my name is Adrienne Harvitz, and I am a pre-K through 12 health and PE teacher licensed in New Mexico and in Washington, D.C. I've also been a technical training and assistance program trainer for early childhood educators throughout the state of New Mexico in topics like health, nutrition, professional development, etc. And I've also been a yoga teacher for over 10 years and studied with some amazing practitioners and researchers and leaders in the field of somatic experiencing and at-risk trauma-informed yoga and all these kinds of things. So today what I'm going to be doing is presenting to you a short PowerPoint, sorry, I know it's kind of boring, but presentation about the stress response and how we can all become more stress resilient with a little understanding of how the stress response works in the body, brain, and nervous system, and how we can actually use our awareness of that to stop it from taking over our life and creating dysfunction for us. That's my intention today. Personally, why I have gravitated towards this topic is that I came to a point in my life where I did have a lot of challenges with stress after, a head injury and car accidents and things like that. At various points in my life, I wasn't really able to handle very well just regular stress in everyday life because I had become sort of programmed to overreact to every little stress as a big stress because my nervous system wasn't functioning very well. I wasn't having this flow state where, there's a little thing and then you get over it and then you relax, and then there's another exciting thing and then you relax. I was kind of going, I would get hyper excited or too down because of this cycle and patterning of experiences that were crisis experiences or really traumatic, and I hadn't learned how to overcome and release them from my body and my system. And we're going to get into what that means and the science of that and what we can do about it in this presentation. All right, so I just wanted to say before I jump in, if any of you are experiencing stress that you would say is more than average or heightened or anything like that, or even the opposite side like depression and things like that, it's all connected and it's all very real. And don't feel bad because this is so common right now that even the Time magazine created a whole issue just about stress. The whole thing is dedicated to different research on stress, resources for stress, and everything. Being that we're living in 2020 and the pandemic is upon us and there's economic hardship and fear for our actual survival and all kinds of things, this is a very real time to experience great stress. So do not feel guilty, don't feel ashamed. If you are experiencing that, you can always reach out to help. I want to be the first person to say that I'm an educator, but I'm not a mental health professional. And if any of you are experiencing anything that feels remotely like overwhelm or depression or anxiety, and you should never feel ashamed to talk to a counselor or a psychiatrist or any kind of professional. So I want to let you know that you ought to do that, and there are plenty of resources for you. I can share at the end of the presentation some that I might recommend. So anyway, without further ado, let's begin this presentation. All right, I'm going to jump into screen sharing mode here for just a second. Screen share. And I'm just going to make sure that we're viewing it as play from start. Okay, here we go. So Stress 101 is basically how stress affects your mind, your body, and nervous system, and how you can become stress resilient. So my disclaimer, as I started to say already, is that I'm not an expert. I do have years of studies and I have trained with people who are. And I created this to help you guys get some understanding. And of course, go see someone who's more qualified than me if you feel the need to do so. I'd like to say a thank you to the people who trained me or whose work I read so I could become educated to educate others. And that includes Amber Gray, Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Hala Khoury, and Stephen Porges, among others. So stress resilience education, I mentioned that whole idea of flow, right? Flow in body and mind and nervous system. We're going to talk more about that now. So what is stress? Stress is anything we perceive to be a threat, but that perception can vary widely from person to person. Your body is reacting to your perception of the threat and not the reality of it. So the way that the body's stress response turns on is that it starts up in the brain. It starts in your limbic system, the lower part of the brain. This is an ancient part of the brain that connected to, you know, very early stages of human evolution. It's always been with us. Some scientists call it the downstairs brain. The amygdala is there. So the job of that part of the brain is to trigger your fight or flight response. This was an ancient tool for survival, right? It literally activates and mobilizes all the parts of our body that can help us meet any threat. Okay? So this is a picture of the brain, the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. The downstairs brain, the amygdala, like we talked about, is allowing us to act before we think, fight or flight, have huge emotional reactions, and many bodily functions. That's why it can trigger the ability to run really fast or lift and throw a car off somebody, all those kinds of things. It is connected to all these functions in the body, breathing, you know, blood flow, all that, all kinds of things I'll tell you more about later. The upstairs brain, right, that's your hippocampus. That's what allows you to think before you act, decision making, control over those emotions, focus, concentrate, be empathetic and self-aware. So when you look at the parts of the brain, there's this, this is from the work of Daniel Siegel. He has some really great books about emotional and psychological regulation for kids, like the Whole Brain Child. There's all these great books by him if you want to look him up. But anyway, he talks about flipping your lid. So when that prefrontal cortex is up within, and it's not able to be the wise leader to the lower part, right? So typically we say that this upper part, the prefrontal cortex, the wise leader, is controlling the amygdala, the hippocampus, that lower part of the brain that's all about impulse and response and reaction. But when the trauma response or the stress response gets triggered, you flip your lid, the wise leader is no longer in charge. And then that reactive part of the brain is where you're coming from. The instincts are all coming out. And it's kind of like, you know, the parent and the toddler. Now the toddler is having a tantrum and the parent can't help them calm down. So the stress response in action, hormones are flooding the brain and the body like adrenaline or epinephrine. Your heart rate increases. You might start to sweat. Blood flows to your limbs so that you could run or swim or fly or punch, right? Like you're getting all this blood flow. Airways expand so you could breathe better. Your digestion stops because your energy is going to all other parts of the body. Your immune system releases these cytokines, which are inflammatory cells, in anticipation that you might be injured in a fight and it might have to help you heal. The brain gets really focused, but it can't multitask. Your emotional impulse leads your behavior. Rational thinking is gone. Cortisol is released, which is a hormone that is then supposed to calm down those cytokines. But if that cortisol stays up too high, it impairs your immune system. It stresses your organs. It makes inflammation worse over time, right? So because those cytokines are trying to be released to as an intense immune response, going to help the body if it's been injured. But then once you're kind of starting to get out of the acute, the intense, immediate part of the stress, you need to get that inflammation down. So then cortisol is basically an autoimmune hormone. It's suppressing the immune system. So you can see if someone is chronically getting highly stressed, they're going to have immune issues, right? Like they may not be able to fight the common cold because they're too run down because of this hormone cycle in the body. Whether a person is being stalked by a lion or by concern for a loved one, the same internal mechanisms kick into gear, involving every vital organ and function in the body. This is a scientist called Hans Selye, and he was in the 1930s discovering this phenomena about the stress response. Remember, your body is responding to the perception of a stress or a threat, not the actual reality of it. So the trick to overcoming your stress response is just to not get stuck in it, right? We can't make our bodies not have a stress response. It's an ancient mechanism, but we can learn how to work with it and get out of the state that it puts us in and back to a state of functioning more normally and healthfully. So the stress response is a really important thing for us, but it should be short-lived. But what happens when it gets stuck on or on repeat or for too long? Well, then people get a long list of symptoms like digestion. You know, if it shuts down digestion, people have digestive issues, immune issues, pain and inflammation in the body, the brain always believing that it has to respond to a threat. That's what it becomes, a chronic stress response that won't stop, an overreaction to small stressors, and that's called anxiety. Anxiety is the internal alarm system that arises when the external threat isn't actually there. It's the anticipation of a threat that doesn't actually ever happen. So even though you might never meet that source of the anxiety, the body still is having to weather the effects of that stress. And then trauma is when you experience an event that overwhelms our ability to cope and respond, leaving us feeling helpless, hopeless, and out of control. So if a person is traumatized, they can't bring their mind or their body back to center after an event is over. The event might leave them feeling psychological, emotional, cognitive, or behaviorally out of whack. They can't come back to a normal state. It affects how people think, feel, and behave. So how does trauma affect the brain? Research from neuroscience, developmental psychopathology, and interpersonal neurobiology confirms that trauma actually creates real physical changes in the brain, physiological changes in the brain and body. It recalibrates brain's alarm system, increases the hormones in the body, particularly stress hormone activity, and it alters all the systems that filter the relevant information. Okay, you know, we're always kind of surfing between the rigidity of and the analyticalness of the left brain, and then the creativity and the flow or extreme chaos of the right brain, right? And when we're getting stuck in different ways of being, it's hard to move more fluidly between them. But that's a picture of an ideal person, you know, paddling their way through the different sides of the brain. And it's not all in your head. Most people think of trauma as mental or a brain disorder. However, trauma also happens in the body and in the nervous system. After a person experiences trauma, their energy is now focused on suppressing chaos, and they can have spontaneous involvement in their own life. Here are some more examples of how the trauma response works. So the nervous system has two responses: the sympathetic, which is that fight or flight, like going with the response, sympathos, with you know, responding with the events of life, and then parasympathetic is calming down from the events of life. That's rest and digest. But in the trauma or stress response, both of those functions of the nervous system can actually be activated. So a parasympathetic response to trauma would be freezing, right? Tonic in immobility, can't think, can't speak, can't move. Flop or fawn, passing out or just completely playing dead. Or friending, having traumatic bonding with somebody that might have hurt you, like Stockholm syndrome, things like that. And then the other part, the sympathetic side, is the obviously fight, physical aggression, mental aggression, you're being really irritable, or flight, run away, try and escape, always overthinking, over planning, right? Here are some more signs and symptoms of stress. You got physical, emotional, mental or cognitive, and then behavioral. So let's start with emotional: depression, fear, anxiety, panic, numbness, irritability, anger, feeling out of control, being avoidant, being irrational or overreacting. And then cognition and memory: can't remember things or can't concentrate, can't make decisions, can't think in order, executive function, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, emotional flooding. Behavioral signs: compulsion, substance abuse, eating disorders, being impulsive or self-destructive, being dissociated, not feeling like they're here or they're real, being isolated, not having, like, you know, can be disruption with someone's sexuality, feeling threatened, hostile, argumentative. And then physically could be unexplained pain or sensations, headaches, sleeping or eating disturbance, low energy, or an excessive startle response. Like you hear the door slam and you jump and you didn't need to, that kind of thing. A healthy nervous system will have, throughout the day, these moments of arousal, which is that sympathetic response, and then settling, parasympathetic. Like for example, you wake up in the morning, you're kind of tired, you get up, you do some stretching, you start to get more energy, maybe you eat breakfast, you settle into work or schoolwork, you get more relaxed, then you get up, you have lunch, you take a walk, you get a phone call that wasn't so great, you get a little down, call a friend, perk you up, you get a little up, that kind of thing, right? That's a healthy nervous system response. But a nervous system that has undischarged traumatic stress can have these kinds of issues where there's, stuck on and hyper arousal is what it's called, anxiety, panic, startle response, can't digest food, emotional flooding, chronic pain, or stuck off, which is depression, having no affect, blah, 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 when they talk. Deadness, sort of like being so tired, can't get out of bed, disoriented, disconnected, low blood pressure, can't digest food. And look, Here's that lightning bolt, the traumatic event that broke the pattern of that easy fluid flow into this more chaotic pattern or rhythm. So what is that lightning bolt? That lightning bolt moment is a trigger, which is the activity, the person, the conversation, the environment that signals that there's an act of danger based on their own historical experience with trauma. So that leads to the whole emotional, physiological, behavioral response of that we need to go into survival mode. Okay. For like someone who was in a car accident, maybe hearing a really loud noise that makes them think of the car accident could throw them back into that moment, right? So again, the trigger is about someone's perception, which is being experienced as reality. It does it from person to person. It's really different, and it's perception and individual response, not actual threat based. The mind-body connection then sets into motion that whole fight, flight, or freeze response. And the triggered individual might be experiencing a wide range of emotions or physical sensations. This could include, fear, panic, upset, agitation, many of those things. Any of those things that were symptoms of stress or trauma could be coming up for the person in the moment when the trigger happens. So what do we do about stress, right? We can build resilience, the ability to bounce back. And here's how we do it. So you saw this whole diagram before. So now we're going to show, that this zone here where we can allow ourselves to go up and down within, this is the resilient zone, and we want to stay there. So right now, the traumatic event happened, you might get off center for a second, go, whoa, really high, but lower. And ideally, you want to find ways that you can keep yourself from bouncing outside of the range of being way too stuck on high alert or down and lethargic and depressed and checked out, right? So how are we going to do that? Well, the good news is we have control. This right here, this is the important part. Taking charge over your stress response in the moment when you could start to feel yourself going into a pattern of dysfunction so that you won't get stuck in high or low. And that's exciting, right? That there is a moment where you can take charge and prevent this from happening to you. So resiliency, everybody has like a scale, right, of the positive and good and negative factors in their life. And whether your scale tips more to negative or positive can have a lot to do with privilege, prior life experience, but your own DNA, your genetics, your upbringing, your life story, your personality, right? So, but that's, so some people might need more positive factors to tip their scale to the positive, and that's okay. And some people might be naturally way more positive. I'm sure you've met those people that they just seem happy all the time, something happens and they're like, okay. Maybe they have a great family life. Financially, they have been given cards that you weren't. And then there's people that maybe they seem like they have so many advantages, but they are so susceptible to stress and sadness, and they're always down, like there's a cloud over their head. Everybody's different. The point of resiliency is having that self-awareness and then building more resources, good things, positivity on your own scale so that the blows of life and the negative experiences don't tip your scale so much. So what are good things and what are those resiliency resources? Safe housing, dependable transportation, a doctor you trust, having enough money, people that you can count on, a good relationship with your mental health providers, good relationships with family and friends, activities you enjoy, a mind-body practice, all these kinds of things are going to help you build your ability to bounce back from stressors and stay on the positive and with flow in your life. So elements of resilience include inspiration, self-attunement, resourcefulness, goal setting and planning, connection, positivity, empowerment, gratitude, and innovation. And how do we build our resilience? There are many, many mind-body techniques, skills, habits, and support resources that we can use to build resilience. So my goal when I teach people is to give them access to those, but always reaching out to a teacher, a trusted friend, an adult, a counselor, if you need more. If you're ever feeling, if you get to that acute place, there are so many resources. There's a suicide prevention hotline. You can Google that for one. You can also look up, here in Santa Fe, we have the Sky Center, and they do free counseling and mental health support. If you're feeling like you're having acute trauma, we have the Solace Crisis Center. They do free counseling for people who are experiencing traumatic stress. And there's all kinds of other resources if you were just to Google counseling or mental health in my area where I live. And I would encourage anyone to do that. And So let's talk about the, so this basically is for when I usually use this presentation as a part of a curriculum. I would follow this up with a sampling of breathing, mind, body, and guided meditation activities, which you can all find at my website, Fly Fitness. I'll drop a link at the end of this so you can go over there if you like. I also have this example of something that might be very helpful to you here. This is a personal stress inventory, and this is something I would encourage everyone to do when they finish watching this today. It's a 3-column chart: signs or symptoms of my own stress response, triggers, and then the resources. What can I do for myself, or who can I connect to, or where can I go to help myself feel better? So that's something too that I'm going to pop up on the screen in just a moment so you can see that. You are resilient, and I hope that you'll find some time to explore, your own resources for resilience, maybe even practice with me. And I really appreciate you tuning in today.